The idea of a critical consciousness is basically an awakening, a spiritual awakening, which, according to New Discourses by James Lindsay, critical consciousness describes how oppressed or marginalized people learn to critically analyze their social conditions and act to change them. He says, critical consciousness is composed of three components: critical reflection, political efficacy, and critical action. Knowledge of critical consciousness and its component parts helps youth practitioners and scholars facilitate the process and expand the understanding of the concept. Critical reflection refers to a social analysis and moral rejection of societal inequities such as socio-economic, racial, ethnic, and gender inequities that constrain well-being and human agency. Again, quote, critical consciousness is, in short, having adopted a critical mindset in the sense of critical theories. It is to have taken on a worldview that sees society in terms of systems of power, privilege, dominance, oppression, and marginalization, and that has taken up an intention to become an activist against these problematics. To have developed a critical consciousness is to have become aware, in light of this worldview, that you are either oppressed or an oppressor, or at least complicit in oppression as a result of your socialization into an oppressive system. To have a critical consciousness is to be aware of and generally unhappy about your positionality in society, i.e., your relationship to systemic and institutional power as determined by theory and based mostly on facts concerning what demographic groups you are a part of. We can go on and on about this, but you get the drift. So, to achieve a critical consciousness, you have to go through a process called conscientization. And conscientization is a term that was coined by Paulo Freire, again, and that is basically, according to the Freire Institute, conscientization is the process of developing a critical consciousness of the social and political forces that shape our lives and developing a critical thinking skills to challenge injustice and create change. Now listen up, listen closely. Quote, this is not simply an intellectual process or a moment of enlightenment, but one that presupposes an ongoing commitment to action. Nor is it an individual process. We discover and seek to change reality through our collective activity. The concept is a difficult one as it is often misused by people who treat it as an intellectual process. Paulo Freire says that we all acquire social myths which have a dominant tendency, and so learning in a critical process which depends upon uncovering real problems and actual needs. Conscientization, the process of developing a critical consciousness, is not simply an intellectual process or a moment of enlightenment, but one that presupposes an ongoing commitment to action. In other words, you have to be changed and transformed. You have to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In other words, we're talking about a spiritual transformation. Now, I just quoted in part Romans 12, but this conscientization applies it in a counterfeit way, in a secular humanistic kind of way. So again, this, my friends, is critical pedagogy. As I said already, it is a counterfeit religion. You get converted through conscientization and achieving a critical consciousness. Basically, critical pedagogy is also discipleship, of course, and it's training children to become activists.